Subscribe to our channel and press the bell icon so that you never miss any video lesson from RAU'S IAS Study Circle. Hello and welcome to Daily News Simplified, an answer to what, why and how of newspaper reading. Today we shall discuss the important news which has appeared in the New Delhi edition of the Hindu newspaper dated 24th July 2020. The news to be discussed has been displayed on your screen and timestamping for the same has been provided in your discussion box below. So on this note, let's start our today's discussion from your UPSC prelims as well as mains perspective. The first news to be discussed appears as an editorial on page number 6. It says calibrated balance. Non-alignment as a policy must be rethought, but India must be wary of alliance system. Now this whole editorial is with respect to views expressed by Minister of External Affairs Jaishankar, where the External Affairs Minister has said that non-aligned movement is a concept which belonged to a bygone era, and this bygone era has been referred as the era where Cold War existed between United States and its allies and the erstwhile Soviet Union and their allies. So in this regard, the minister has said that the idea of non-alignment as a concept belonged to a bygone era, and now the time is for a multipolar world or multipolarity. And it is with respect to multipolarity where the minister said that because of multipolarity, India has to take stands on various important global issues such as connectivity, maritime security, terrorism, as well as climate change. However, it's important to note that the minister said that India is not ruling out non-alignment entirely, but it is more focused on the idea of a multipolar world. So based on this editorial highlights the contentions raised by Minister of External Affairs. Now these contentions which we will go through must be seen from the prism or perspective of US-China conflict and its impact on India on land as well as sea. The next prism through which this contention must be seen is with respect to India-US relationship, as United States wants India to be its military partner, but India has ruled against any such alliance. And the third and another very important aspect is from the perspective of India-Russia relationship. Now this relationship between India and Russia becomes significant not only with respect to a growing India-China conflict, but also with respect to a growing US-China conflict. So in this regard, the points raised by Jaishankar must be viewed in these three perspectives. Now these three perspectives also becomes a significant fodder for your mains examination, as questions can be asked with respect to impact on India vis-a-vis US-China conflict, India-US relationship, keeping in mind the factor of China on one hand as well as Russia on the other hand, and India-Russia relationship, especially from the perspective of India's involvement at BRICS, RIC, as well as SCO, that is Shanghai Cooperation Organization. So based on these viewpoints, let us first of all go through the contentions as mentioned by the Minister of External Affairs, views expressed in this editorial in the second half, and also with respect to what the decision makers or the policy think tanks of Russia is thinking with respect to its relationship with India vis-a-vis growing conflict between India and China on one hand and also growing conflict between US and China on the other hand. So the Minister of External Affairs has said that India does not reject non-alignment in its entirety, as we have already said, and has asserted that no matter what, India will not compromise on its independence. Further, the minister rejects the idea of an alliance and said that India has never been part of an alliance system, nor will it ever be. Now this aspect becomes significant, especially with respect to India-US relationship. And in the same context, he said that even the United States must look beyond its present alliance system and engage with a more multilateral arrangements. So basically the minister is highlighting for multipolarity, and in this context is even asking United States to cooperate with a multipolar world. Now in this regard, we can say that a multilateral agreements involve three or more parties, for example WTO. Now here it's important to understand that the current discourse or the current growing conflicts between United States and China has been referred by various scholars as the new Cold War or the Cold War 2.0. And on this perspective, Minister of External Affairs Jaishankar said that the principle of non-alignment may have worked during the Soviet-US Cold War time, but now things have changed. And in the changed circumstances, India and China share land boundaries, and this aspect will always be a factor in the new Cold War. So, it is with respect to this, the minister has rejected the idea to join any alliances because it impacts India's territorial sovereignty, especially with respect to an growing and assertive China. Now, this aspect is also important as China already sees India as a quasi-ally of United States, whereas US on the other hand wants India to become its military partner and patrol the South China Sea on its behalf, as we have seen in the previous discussions of DNS videos. And it's because of these strategic developments in geopolitics, India, even though having good relations with the United States, does not want to become its official military partner, as India fears that there is more strategic loss than gain from this entire exercise. So the views expressed by the minister is with respect to the contemporary developments along South China Sea, US-China conflict as well as India-China conflict. So, with respect to these comments, the editorial says that Jaishankar comments are a clear eyed assessment of India's constraints as well as avenues for its potential growth. So, this editorial says that with respect to the comments, the government of India has taken care of both the constraints as well as avenues for growth with respect to its growing international relations with countries. Further, the editorial says that India's assertion of strategic independence and resistance to join any alliance either with China or United States will help India to stay away from the conflict between United States and China, especially in the South China Sea as well as in the Indian Ocean region. And this will also help India to guard the Bay of Bengal area from Chinese naval presence, as even China does not want to get directly involved with India, especially in the Bay of Bengal region. Now, another important aspect highlighted in this editorial is that despite multiple references by United States Secretary of State, India has not chosen to discuss the conflict with China on a multilateral forum and rather has chosen to pursue its dispute through a bilateral mechanism. So, settling of dispute on Galwan Valley through bilateral negotiation has in a way limited the participation by other countries who very much wants to get involved between India-China relationship, especially the United States of America. Now the editorial says that another strategic move or an important move which India took was its outreach policy towards Moscow. And this was done knowing the fact of closeness between Russia and China. And this outreach was facilitated by visit of Defense Minister of India and also participation of Minister of External Affairs in the Russia-India-China trilateral last month, that is RIC. Now at the trilateral talk, Jaishankar made a very important comment where he said that India should also seek to build coalitions with middle powers such as European Union and Japan. So basically, India is again stressing for multipolarity and does not want a world led only by few select countries such as United States or even China, and rather want a rule-based policy whereby all the countries engage simultaneously at equal level. So in this regard, the editorial says that Government of India has taken a calibrated move in order to restore balance in the area or in the region, especially during the time of double crisis, that is, during the time of COVID crisis as well as crisis caused due to Galwan clash between India and China. So these are some of the views expressed in this editorial with respect to India's strategy and also with respect to views expressed by Minister of External Affairs, especially with respect to multipolarity, India-US relationship, as well as growing and assertive China, whereby he said that multipolarity is the need of the hour and India needs to take a stand on issues like connectivity, maritime security, terrorism, as well as climate change. And lastly, let us go through the viewpoints of Russia, especially with respect to India-China border conflict. Now, the policy think tanks in Moscow believe that regional and security stability in Eurasia, that is, combination of Europe as well as Asia, to a wide extent hinges on the interactions inside New Delhi Moscow Beijing triangle. And accordingly, this trilateral is regarded as a key platform for many Russian foreign policy initiatives from nuclear non-proliferation to international terrorism as well as drug trafficking. So basically, Russia believes in the concept of Greater Eurasia or a Greater Eurasian Partnership. And this concept of Greater Eurasian Partnership as a geopolitical concept was unveiled by Russia's President Vladimir Putin 4 years ago. Further, regional mechanisms such as Shanghai Cooperation Organization, Eurasian Economic Union, that is EAEU, as well as Russia, India, China, that is RIC, are considered or viewed as an integral part of this construct. That is, they are considered as an integral part of Greater Eurasian Partnership. And accordingly, this triangle of New Delhi, Beijing, and Moscow becomes very significant from the perspective of Russian foreign policy. Now, it is here whereby the importance of India also emerges. It says that in case of serious rift in New Delhi-Beijing relations, Russia's vision for Greater Eurasia has received limited enthusiasm from its partners. And according to the policy think tank in Russia, because of India-China conflict, Russia's vision for Greater Eurasia might receive little enthusiasm from its partners and it is likely to crumble. So basically, India-China conflict is also a problem for Russia in order to achieve its Greater Eurasian dream. And because of this crumbling relation between India and Beijing, the idea or the vision of Russia with respect to achieving Greater Eurasia through Greater Eurasian Partnership, of which SCO, that is Shanghai Cooperation Organization, Eurasian Economic Union, and Russia-India-China trilateral is an important construct. So in this regard, it highlights that the conflict between India and China also will impact healthy functioning of BRICS as well as RIC component. And this overall will impact Russia's vision for Greater Eurasia. So according to the policy think tank in Russia, India is a significant and important partner if Russia is to achieve its Greater Eurasian dream. And accordingly, the leading thinkers of Russia in the report on the new Russian foreign policy has suggested that in the current scenario, Russia should become the leader of a new non-aligned movement and hence it is imperative to cooperate with India in order for this movement to become united. So basically, Russia now wants greater involvement or cooperation with India in order to achieve its Greater Eurasian dream. So the scholars in Russia think that Russia's strategic goal is to upgrade its relations with India to the level of its relations with China. So Russia basically wants India to think that it is treating India the same way in which it treats China, that is at par. And this relationship between Russia and India will provide Moscow with a much needed geopolitical equilibrium in Eurasia. Now as you can see in this map, this is the idea of Eurasia, that is a combination of Asian countries as well as European countries. Now there is another angle to this entire debate which is going on currently in Moscow among the policy think tanks. Now the growing apprehension in Moscow is that they do not want to be seen as China's junior partner. And because of this, that they do not want to be seen as China's junior partner, they need to highlight India's growing and increasingly significant role in Russia's geopolitical calculations. So basically, even to achieve Greater Eurasian dream of Russia, and also that Russia is not seen as a junior partner of China, Russia needs to highlight India's growing significant role in the region in order to achieve its Greater Eurasian dream. So this trilateral of Russia, India and China, which was organized by Moscow, needs to be seen in this entire backdrop of Russia's vision to achieve a Greater Eurasian dream. So accordingly, it highlights that it was important for Moscow to organize the trilateral of Russia, India, China against the backdrop of upcoming summits of BRICS SCO, which Russia will host in St. Petersburg later in the year 2020. So we understand that even for Russia, India is slowly becoming more important as compared to China. However, Russia at the same time does not want to antagonize China as well. That's why Russia organized the trilateral of Russia, India, China, especially in the backdrop of India-China conflict in the Galwan Valley region. Now, these aspects becomes important if a question is asked, especially highlighting Russia-India relationship in the backdrop of India-China conflict. So, After this discussion, as a way forward for India, we can say that India, along with United States, must not leave out Russia in its overall foreign policy strategy. Further, Russia still hinges on the old friendship with India for the sake of its greater Eurasian partnership construct along with its greater Eurasian dream. And lastly, we can say that Russia can act as the perfect balance in the region and provide more stability and strength to India's relationship with Russia as well as China in the backdrop of BRICS, Shanghai Cooperation Organization, as well as Russia India China trilateral. Now, this topic becomes important both from the perspective of your prelims examination as well as from the perspective of your mains. From your mains, it gets covered under GS paper 2, especially with respect to bilateral, regional, and global groupings and agreements involving India or affecting India's interest. And from your prelims point of view, it gets covered under current events of international importance. So, with this, let's move on to our next topic of discussion. The next topic to be discussed appears on page number 6 as another editorial. It says Escalating Tensions. The downward spiral in US China ties is a bad news for the whole world. Now, this particular editorial mentions about the fact that United States has closed Chinese consulate in Houston. And this closing of a Chinese consulate in United States represents an unprecedented escalation, and this reflects a declining US-China relationship. Now, with respect to declining US-China relationship, this might have a larger geo-conflict or an impact on overall relations of different countries. So in this regard, this editorial again becomes important from the perspective of declining US-China relationship. Now this news says that United States has closed Chinese consulate in Houston. Now here you need to understand the difference between a consulate as well as an embassy. Now an embassy represents a permanent diplomatic mission of a country in a foreign country, and it is generally situated in capital city of a country. For example, the Embassy of United States in India is situated in New Delhi, and the Embassy of India in United States is situated in Washington DC. However, the consulates are situated in different commercial cities, and these consulates take care of day-to-day needs of its citizens in the foreign countries and also fosters commercial and other important affairs. As already mentioned, that they are situated in different commercial locations in a country. For example, the United States consulates in India is located in Chennai, Kolkata, Mumbai, as well as Hyderabad. Further, an embassy is led by the ambassador, and a consulate is led by an officer lower in rank as compared to an ambassador. The ambassadors represent their head of the state, whereas the consulate officers represent the government of the country. Now, India also maintains its consulate in San Francisco in United States, and the Consulate of India is headed by the Consulate General of India, who is lower in rank as compared to India's ambassador to United States. Further, embassy cooperates at the highest level with respect to political as well as economic cooperation. So after understanding these differences between embassy as well as consulate, let us go through the important highlights of this editorial as provided in page number 6. So in this regard, let us first of all go through the accusation which United States has put on China. It says that the United States has accused the consulate and other Chinese diplomatic missions in the country of economic espionage, visa fraud, as well as attempted theft of scientific research. Now, espionage here refers to the act of spying in order to obtain certain important or secretive information. So, the United States has not only closed the Chinese consulate in Houston, but has also announced visa restriction on Chinese students. US has imposed sanction on Chinese officials over a Hong Kong security law, and also United States is considering a sweeping travel ban on millions of members of China's ruling Communist Party. Now, on one of the Chinese researcher, US had issued warrant as this Chinese researcher had certain ties with the army of China. Now, the United States had issued an arrest warrant because the researcher allegedly lied to the US authorities about her ties to the Chinese army. So this is another major flashpoint between United States and China with respect to providing refuge to one of the Chinese researchers who, according to the US authorities, had ties with army of China. Now these actions of United States on China will have a larger impact on geopolitics. So let us go through some of those important impacts with respect to these sanctions which US has imposed on China. So in this regard, the editorial says that what started as a trade war between United States and China in 2018 has grown into a larger geopolitical contest between these superpowers. And it's also important to understand that these two countries are one of the largest economies of the world. So in this regard as well, growing conflict between US and China does not seem good. Further, the editorial says that what makes the crisis dangerous in the long term is that there is a growing consensus in Washington, that is United States, that a hostile China resorting to large-scale espionage poses a serious threat to US dominated international world order. So this is one aspect which becomes important to understand because United States sees China as its direct counterpart and competition. According to the United States, a hostile China resorting to large scale espionage poses a serious threat to the US dominated international order. Further, the editorial says that the damage done because of the US China declining relationship seems irreversible. And if this continues at this scale, then the impact will resonate among relations between US allies on one hand as well as allies of China on the other hand. And this overall also might disturb the present international world order. Further, the editorial says that the US China crisis is unfolding at a time when Beijing has become more assertive in Asia and of late is picking fights with neighboring countries from India to Vietnam and Malaysia. So, in this regard, the editorial says that China seems to be ready for a long game of escalation as long as US keeps playing it. So, this editorial says that if this deterioration is not arrested or stopped immediately, the United States and China risk a total breakdown in their diplomatic relationship, and this will impact relations of other significant countries in their respective region. So, we understand that declining China US relationship will have impact throughout the world. Now, with respect to declining China US relationship, it will also impact India. So, in this regard, India needs to take strategic measure considering the growing rift between these two countries, as China will use this opportunity to its advantage and against India, considering growing India US ties. Further, as already discussed, US would want India to become its military partner. So, in this regard, India needs to tread carefully on this part. And lastly, it says that growing US China rift might also affect India Russia relationship, considering upcoming BRICS summit, which is to take place in Russia later in 2020. Further, declining relationship between US and China and also declining relationship between India and China will also impact Russia's vision of greater Eurasian dream. So considering all these aspects, India needs to tread very carefully, especially with respect to declining relation between United States and China. Thus both these editorials appearing on page number 6 becomes important from our examination perspective, as questions can be asked in our prelims as well as our mains examination. Now of late UPSC has not asked any question particularly with respect to India-Russia relationship. So on this account, this aspect of India-Russia relationship and also Russia's vision of greater Eurasia becomes important from your examination perspective. So a declining US-China relationship also gets covered under GS paper 2 as it has its impact on India, and with respect to your prelims it gets covered under current events of international importance. So with this discussion of both these editorials, let's move on to our next topic of discussion. The next news to be discussed appears on page number 1. It says curbs on bidders from new nations. Now as per this news, the central government has amended the General Financial Rules of 2017, which impacts public finances. And this has been done to impose restrictions on bidders from countries which shares land border with India. And this restriction has been imposed on grounds of defense of India as well as national security. So any matter which relates either directly or indirectly with respect to defense of India or national security, then in such situation the government can impose restrictions on bidders from such countries which shares land borders with India. Now you must understand that this step has been taken by the government of India, especially to prohibit bidders from China. And in this regard, the Department of Expenditure has issued detailed order on public procurement to strengthen India's defense and national security. Further, this amendment also provides for a compulsory registration of project to the competent authority. So this news becomes important primarily from the perspective of your prelims examination with respect to economy as well as polity and governance. So, according to the order, any bidder from such countries which shares land border with India will be eligible to bid in any procurement of goods, services, including consultancy services, non-consultancy services, or any works including turnkey projects only if the bidder is registered with the competent authority. Now here the competent authority is the registration committee constituted by Department of Promotion of Industry and Internal Trade. So the first aspect is compulsory registration with the competent authority. And in this regard, the bidding includes for any procurement of goods, services, including consultancy as well as non-consultancy services, and works including turnkey projects. Now, turnkey project is a contract under which a firm agrees to fully design, construct, and equip a manufacturing, business, or service facility, and after doing so, they turn the entire project to the purchaser when it is ready for operation for a particular price or a particular remuneration. Further, the order highlights that these new provisions will also apply to all new tenders. So, as per the amendment, these new provisions will apply to all new tenders. However, with respect to old tenders or with respect to tenders already invited, if the first stage of evaluation of qualifications has not been completed, then such bidders who are not registered under the new order will be treated as not qualified. So primarily we understand that registration with the registration committee becomes important for any bidder from countries with which India shares its land borders. Now with respect to registration, as we have already seen that the competent authority will be the registration committee constituted under the DPIIT. It further says that political and security clearance from Ministry of External Affairs as well as Ministry of Home Affairs will be mandatory. Now this again becomes an important aspect with respect to bidding of projects from such countries which shares border with India. And in this regard, the order takes into ambit public sector banks as well as financial institutions, autonomous bodies, central public sector enterprises, as well as public-private partnership projects receiving financial support from the government or its undertaking. Now, regarding other steps with respect to the amendment, the state governments will also play a vital role with respect to securing national security as well as defense of India. Accordingly, the Government of India has written to all the chief secretaries of the state governments invoking provisions of Article 257 Clause 1 of the Indian Constitution in order to implement this particular order. Now, as you can see, Article 257 Clause 1 mentions about control of the Union over states in certain cases. It says that executive power of every state shall be so exercised as not to impede or prejudice the exercise of executive power of the Union. So basically the executive power of the state shall not go beyond the executive power of the Union, and the executive power of the Union shall extend to giving of such directions to state as may appear to the Government of India to be necessary for that particular purpose. So, in order to implement the General Financial Rules Amendment of 2020, the Government of India under Article 257 Clause 1 has directed all the Chief Secretaries of the state governments to invoke the provisions with respect to defense as well as national security of India regarding procurement by state governments as well as state undertakings. Now, with respect to state government procurement, the competent authority will be constituted by states. However, the political and security clearances will remain necessary from the Government of India, that is from the Ministry of Home Affairs as well as from the Ministry of External Affairs. Now earlier we have mentioned that the move of the government is primarily to restrict bidders from China. So in this regard, the government has extended lines of credit or provided a sort of an exception in the order to Bangladesh, Nepal as well as Myanmar. So effectively making bidders from China as well as Pakistan to compulsory register with the competent authority to bid in any procurements. Another important aspect from your prelims perspective is that India shares its border with China, Nepal, Bhutan, Pakistan, Afghanistan, Bangladesh, as well as Myanmar. Hence, this topic becomes primarily important from the perspective of your prelims examination. The next news to be discussed appears as an article on page number 7. It says Deepening India South Korea ties. People from the two countries need to overcome cultural biases and move closer to each other. This particular article highlights that despite good relations between India and South Korea, economic partnership between the two countries is still stuck at $22 billion dollars, as well as defense partnership appears to have receded to a mere sale and purchase of weapons. So in this aspect, this article highlights that there is a need for more people to people interaction between the two countries, which will help in creating relationship based on empathy, which will overall lead to more openness, curiosity, as well as warmth between the people of two countries. So overall, the emphasis in this article is to create more people to people contact and also to fill the cultural gap which is felt in both countries with respect to each other. Now, with respect to shared culture heritage between India and South Korea, it says that according to SamgukYusa, or the heritage history of three kingdoms, which was written in the 13th century, a princess from Ayodhya, that is Suriratna, came to Korea, married King Kim Suro, and became the queen Har Huang Ok in the year 48 AD. Further, Korean Buddhist monk Haicho or Hongzhou visited India from 723 to 729 AD and also wrote a travelogue named Pilgrimage to the Five Kingdoms of India. And this travelogue gives a vivid account of Indian culture, politics, as well as society. Now, this particular travelogue written by Haicho was rediscovered in China in 1908 and was subsequently translated into different languages, including Hindi. And this was done under the guidance of UNESCO. And the original fragment is now owned by the National Library of France. And even the Nobel laureate Rabindranath Tagore composed a short but evocative poem, namely Lamp of the East, in the year 1929 with respect to Korea's glorious past and its promising bright future. So we see that there are certain shared cultural heritage between India as well as South Korea. Now, the president of South Korea officially visited India in the year 2018, and on their visit, India and South Korea drew a contours of relationship on different aspects with respect to each other. So, in this regard, let us go through the different dimensions of the contours of relationship between India as well as South Korea. Now, with respect to strategic relationship, both India and South Korea consider their relationship to be a special strategic partnership, and this is built on the foundations of deep-rooted historical and cultural bonds, shared universal values of democracy, free market economy, rule of law, as well as peaceful, stable, secure, free, open, inclusive, and rules-based region as well as society. And in this context, India considers South Korea as a key partner in Act East policy, whereas South Korea considers India as a central pillar in its new Southern policy. Now, with respect to shared heritage, India and South Korea have agreed to expedite the work to upgrade the monument of Queen Suriratna in Ayodhya as a joint project to celebrate their shared heritage. Now, as we have already seen that Princess Suriratna was a legendary princess of Ayodhya who went to Korea in 48 AD and married King Kim Suro of royal Korean family. And a large number of Koreans trace their ancestry to this legendary princess. Thus, Princess Suriratna becomes a shared cultural history between India as well as South Korea. Now, with respect to economic cooperation, South Korea has shown keenness with respect to partnering in India's flagship initiatives such as Make in India, Skill India, Digital India, Startup India, Smart Cities, etc. And South Korea said that it would continue to support India's infrastructure development projects through Korea's Economic Development Cooperation Fund and export credit. Now, with respect to denuclearization, both India and South Korea have committed their support for complete denuclearization as well as lasting peace and stability in the Korean Peninsula. And in this regard, both countries have agreed that they shall work together to prevent proliferation of weapons of mass destruction and also delivery systems, particularly to terrorist and non-state actors. Another important aspect is that South Korea has reiterated its support to India's membership to the nuclear supplier group, which is currently opposed by China. So we see that there are various areas of cooperation between India and South Korea apart from their shared cultural heritage. So it is in this regard this article says that the time has come for India and South Korea to fill up their cultural gaps, and this can be done by leveraging people to people contact in both these countries. So in this regard the article says that the establishment of Indian Culture Center in Seoul in 10 years ago was a step in the right direction, and its mission was to promote people to people contacts. So in this regard the government of India can use services provided by the Indian Culture Center to organize sessions centered around Indian culture, tradition, cuisine for not only the urban people of South Korea but also for the common citizen of South Korea even living in the villages. And similarly, South Korea may open up culture center in important towns and cities of India to showcase their cultural diversity in India. So this is the way in which both the countries, by showing their cultural strength to each other, can improve their people to people contact, as it will help in creating a relationship based on empathy, which will ultimately lead to more openness, curiosity and warmth between the people of these two countries. So overall, this article concludes by saying that amidst changing balance of power in the region, India and South Korea can cooperate with each other by filling their cultural gaps. Now this topic becomes important as direct question in your mains examination can be asked with respect to India-South Korea relationship or areas in which India and South Korea can enhance their bilateral relationship including trade. Thus, this topic becomes important from the perspective of bilateral relations between India and South Korea. However, question can also be asked with respect to India and South Korea's shared culture. So from your prelims perspective, this topic gets covered under current events of international importance and also with respect to history as well as culture of India. So after this, let's move on to our next topic of discussion. The next article to be discussed appears on page number 6. It says, Towards National Security and Peace in Hong Kong. It is in India's interest to maintain stability in the Hong Kong Special Administrative Region, given their economic and trade ties. Now, this particular article has been written by the Chinese ambassador to India. So, in this regard, this article and its content becomes very important for us to understand so as to know the Chinese side of the story, especially with respect to Hong Kong. Now, in this article, the Chinese ambassador has time and again stressed about China's national security and has also asserted that Hong Kong is an internal affair of China and hence no foreign country, including Western countries, can have any say with respect to Hong Kong. Now, in this regard, the article also mentions about India. It says that India and Hong Kong have close economic and trade relations. And in this regard, it serves in India's interest to maintain the prosperity and stability in Hong Kong. So, effectively, the Chinese ambassador has asked India to support its policy in Hong Kong. Further, the Chinese ambassador has asserted that law of China on safeguarding national security in the Hong Kong Special Administrative Region marks a major turning point from unrest and unguarded national security in Hong Kong. So it is based on this perspective that the Chinese ambassador to India has written this article favoring China's national security and also the fact that Hong Kong is an internal matter of China and no other country has any right to interfere in China's internal matter, and has also asserted that it is in India's interest that peace and stability is maintained in Hong Kong to improve economy as well as trade relations between India and Hong Kong. So with respect to this article, let us go through the opinion of Chinese ambassador. Now, the Chinese ambassador has said that Hong Kong independent separatist group have support from foreign nations, and this has made Hong Kong plunged into gravest situation. It further says that the Hong Kong GDP have registered negative growth for the first time in a decade, and the unemployment rate has hit a record high in last 10 years. Further, the Chinese ambassador says that the law which has been made for Hong Kong has been made as per the Chinese constitution and hence is very much legal. He says that the national security legislation for HKSAR that is Hong Kong Special Administrative Region, was enacted by the Standing Committee of China's National People's Congress as per the Chinese Constitution and Basic Law of Hong Kong Special Administrative Region. So, in this regard, the law for Hong Kong has been enacted for resolute and full implementation of the policy of one country, two systems, under which the people of Hong Kong administered the area with a high degree of autonomy. The law has been enacted for safeguarding national security, as asserted by the Chinese ambassador. Further, the law has also been enacted to prevent, suppress, and impose punishment for offences of secession, subversion, organization, as well as perpetration of terrorist activities and collusion with a foreign country or with external elements to endanger national security in relation to Hong Kong. So, overall, according to the Chinese ambassador, the law for Hong Kong is to maintain prosperity and stability of Hong Kong and to protect the lawful rights and interests of residents of Hong Kong. So, in this perspective, these opinions of Chinese ambassadors, especially with respect to Hong Kong, becomes important. So, according to the ambassador, the benefits of the legislation can be said to be the following. He says that the legislation will guarantee sustained implementation of one country, two systems, as one country is the precondition and basis for two systems. Only when one country is safe and secure, two systems can be safeguarded. He further mentions that the legislation will neither change the principle of one country, two system or the high degree of autonomy practiced in Hong Kong, nor the legal system in Hong Kong or Hong Kong's independent judicial power. Further, he asserts that the law will not affect the rights of people but rather protect the lawful rights and freedoms of people of Hong Kong. And for a handful of people endangering national security or those people who are protesting against Chinese law, then he says that law is a sword, or in other words, strict action will be taken against such person. So he says that yet the law is a guardian of the rights, freedoms and peaceful life of vast majority, and only strict actions will be taken against the protesters. He further says that the legislation will safeguard long-term prosperity and stability of Hong Kong, and hereby he asserts the importance of national security for China and says that there will be neither lasting peace nor stability for China with respect to long-term prosperity and stability for Hong Kong. So according to the ambassador, these are some of the benefits with respect to legislation for Hong Kong. And lastly, the ambassador says that Hong Kong is an internal affair of China and no foreign country should interfere in China's internal affairs. It says that national security legislation belongs to the sovereignty of a country and accordingly the authority of central government. So in this respect, it is justified that China governs the country and Hong Kong in accordance with the law. Further, with respect to India and Hong Kong, the ambassador says that India and Hong Kong have close economic trade relations, and in this regard, it serves in India's interest to maintain prosperity and stability in Hong Kong. Further, the ambassador says that the national security legislation for Hong Kong will better protect the safety of foreign investment and legitimate rights and interests of foreign nationals in Hong Kong, including that of India. So, time and again, the Chinese ambassador has asserted about India's relationship with Hong Kong. And lastly, he says that since Hong Kong is an internal affair of China, it hopes that India will uphold fairness and justice and respect and support China's efforts to safeguard national security in Hong Kong in accordance with law. Now, this aspect which has been asserted that Hong Kong is an internal affair of China has been asserted keeping in mind the changes made by the government of India, especially with respect to Kashmir, with respect to Article 370. So, this is the thinking going on in Chinese territory. So, accordingly, China hopes that India does not interfere in Hong Kong, as according to China, it is their internal matter. And any interference by any foreign country, including US or India, will interfere with China's sovereignty. So accordingly, China does not want any interference in their internal affairs. Thus, this topic becomes important to know the other side of the story, especially with respect to the China's side. So this topic becomes important primarily from the perspective of your mains examination with respect to GS paper 2 under international relations. Now after our discussion, this forms your practice question for the day. The question is, Princess Suriratna from Ayodhya became a queen in which of the following country in the year 48 AD? Options are A. Japan, B. Vietnam, C. Korea and D. Sri Lanka. Now, coming to the answer of yesterday, the question was Osaka track, sometimes seen in the news, is related to. Options were A. Free trade zone, B. Digital connectivity, C. Data exchange and data flow, and D. E governance. Here, the correct answer is C. Now, here you must remember that India has not signed the Osaka track. So, with this, we come to an end to today's discussion. Thank you.